Did you know that there is a beautiful beach in Israel that has a 2,000-year-old Roman aqueduct running alongside of it? Shalom, friends. This is Akiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe and continue the conversation down below in the comments through questions or discussion items. So as we were saying, the beach I go to, just about 10 minutes away from my house, is a beautiful beach along the Mediterranean Sea. And on one side is a very long Roman aqueduct built 2,000 years ago to bring water from a nearby spring all the way down to the nearby city of Caesarea or Caesarea. Now, Caesarea was a major hub 2,000 years ago here in the land of Israel. It was the center of Roman control, authority, power, culture, and life here in the land of Israel. Now, the Romans took over control of this land in the year 63 BCE, after the Jews had about almost a century of self-control after defeating the Greeks in the Hasmonean revolt, which is the story of Hanukkah. The Romans come in, they take over control, and they allow the Jews to govern themselves with a Jewish king for a few more decades until that comes to an end, and they put into place the control of Roman governors. Each governor lasted for about 10 years. The most infamous of all of them is Pontius Pilate, who unfortunately was very discriminatory and oppressive against the Jews, but other governors were as well. And progressively it got worse and worse for the Jews under the rule of these Roman governors. The governor sat in Caesarea, in Caesarea, in this city. The city was right on the sea, right along the Mediterranean, and it grew and grew during these times to a major population center. Now, let's just step back one moment. King Herod, who was the last king of Israel appointed by the Romans, he was a master architect. He built many major projects throughout the land of Israel, many of which we can still partially, if not entirely, see today. Caesarea is one of them. He built up the city and he built an artificial port. He built a port where there wasn't supposed to be a port, where there never was a port, so ships can come in and bring commerce into the land, which is exactly what happened. He built himself a huge palace there that extended out into the ocean. Now you can see the remnants of these things today by going to visit the national park that is in Caesarea, and you see really a lot that has remained and has stood the test of time after these 2,000 years. You can see the remains of a huge Roman chariot track where they would have chariot races as part of the Roman culture. You can see bathhouses that were a very important part of the Roman culture as well, where people would go in and there would be hot water and there'd be cold water and there'd be steam rooms and there'd be a whole place not only of physical enjoyment and pleasure, but of social and even economic connection. Once you go to the national park, you can also see the amphitheater that was there. Now, there were a few amphitheaters, Roman amphitheaters, built around the land. And archaeologists and historians noticed that there were quite a number of these amphitheaters for such a small area of land. And one theory as to why that is because it was accommodating the large amount of soldiers that were here in this land. Well, then that leads to another question. Why were there so many soldiers in this very small piece of land, which was called back then Judea? And the answer given to that is because there was such a large amount of unrest here in this land between the Jews and the Romans because of the oppressive policies, both economic and also religious, of the Romans towards the Jews. The Jews were known to rise up against the Romans, to revolt regularly. And the greatest of those revolts started in the year 66, lasted until 70, and it started in Caesarea. Now, Caesarea was a mixed town. There were Jews, there were Romans, there were synagogues, there were Roman houses of pagan worship. And after decades of this oppression and this even discrimination against the Jews rising and strengthening, In the year 66, there was an event that took place in Caesarea where Jews were going to synagogue, and some local Roman pagans were doing pagan sacrifices basically outside their synagogue, and that was it. They had enough. That was the last straw. And from there the revolt begins. It comes to Jerusalem and it spreads around the entire land. As I said, it lasted until the year 70, and it ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple that stood there. So we see Caesarea was a major part of the story back in the day, 2,000 years ago, during the Roman rule. Again, both economically, politically, religiously, and even playing a large part in what would eventually be the downfall of the Second Temple period. And that would open up the gateways for a 2,000-year-long exile for the Jewish people. And we know eventually the Jewish people come home. I'm one of them. My wife and I, we moved to Israel about 20 years ago. Our kids are born here in this land. We live just 10 minutes away from Caesarea, and we take our kids to the beach. And today, when we go to the beach, we see that Roman aqueduct that was bringing water from a nearby spring to the city of Caesarea. And it's a reminder of, who still is here in this land, who has deeper roots in this land, that even though we were kicked out and even though we were defeated 2,000 years ago, we never forgot about our connection with this land. We never lost hope of returning. One day we did return, and we see remnants of other empires here in this land who are no longer around. I'll just end by saying one of the greatest things too about the amphitheater that is there in ancient Caesarea, which, by the way, I'll just quickly say, pretty intensely, in those amphitheaters, they would do these fights. They would do these fights between professional Roman soldiers and fighters and slaves. Many of them being Jewish slaves that the Romans captured in their fighting in their years of control here in this land, and that would provide entertainment for the local Romans, right? These gladiator fights, and this kind of fight took place also in Caesarea, and we in the Jewish tradition have a very, very powerful and sad story of one of the most famous rabbis of all time, Rabbi Akiva, who was captured by the Romans. This was later on after the destruction of the Second Temple. This was in the year approximately 132. Okay, no, I'm sorry, 135. And Rabbi Akiva was captured by the Romans for breaking Roman rule, which was very discriminatory against Jewish practice, and he was brought into a Roman amphitheater, and he was executed in front of a crowd. Many people believe that in Caesarea, the amphitheater in Caesarea, that is where Rabbi Akiva was executed. Today, again, it is part of this archaeological park, but that specifically, the amphitheater, has turned into a modern day theater, and there are modern day concerts that happen there with well-known Israeli singers and musicians and bands that fits thousands of people. And it's an amazing thing to see concerts happening there today, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Modern day Jews enjoying and celebrating modern Jewish life in the Jewish homeland, in the very same place where Jews were oppressed 2,000 years ago. It's an incredible thing to see the switch and the coming home of the Jewish people in the Caesarea.